is Saturday, June 17th, and welcome to another edition of the Armstrong Williams Show. We will start today's conversation on former President Donald Trump pleading innocent to all charges against him before he faced the judge in Miami this week. I'm so happy that his lawyer, Jesse Binnall, is joining us in studio along with the president and CEO of Raynard Jackson Associates, Raynard Jackson. Now, I got to tell you this, Jesse and Raynard. I read the entire indictment. I did. And before reading it, I was thinking about witch hunt. This is just unfair. This man is targeted. But the people that indict him, and Jesse can speak to this, are the people that were closest to him. His lawyers, his secretaries, his valets, all gave the necessary evidence for this indictment to hold water. And I know in our country, Raynard, a person is innocent until proven guilty. And even if the president is proven innocent, if what his staff has said about him is true, it is reckless, criminal, and no regard for the rule of law. And on this show, we like to hear all sides. So Jesse, not only did you read it, you're part of the legal team. Your thoughts. Educate us, enlighten us.
Well, first of all, while I do represent President Trump on a number of matters, I do not represent him in this case. So I'm not specifically on this legal team, but I have read the indictment. And there's a couple of important things to remember. Is first of all, anything that you read in the indictment is through the lens of a special counsel's office. A special counsel's office, unfortunately, that has absolutely no credibility because they're part of a Department of Justice that has been hell-bent on going after Donald Trump, and that nothing would stop them. They will always find an excuse to not go after people like Hillary Clinton or Bill Clinton for very, very similar conduct, but to go after Donald Trump. But one of the most important things to remember is that while they can make a lot of things seem bad in an indictment, something lawyers should always ask, is there a legal basis for the indictment? The answer to that is a resounding no. Presidents have always had wide liberty in their presidential documents, the documents created during their term of office. It's something that goes back to George Washington, the founding of the Republic. And that was changed somewhat in 1978 in the Presidential Records Act, where there was became a mechanism for regulating presidential documents, presidential records after a president leaves office. But what never happened is Congress never decided to make presidents subject to the Espionage Act. And so for that very reason, it's the Presidential Records Act, not the Espionage Act, that applies to this case. Courts have held that in cases very similar, specifically in the famous Clinton sock drawer case, that conduct that was almost identical to this was not something that a president could even be sued civilly for, nonetheless criminally. So this is yet another example of going after Donald Trump for conduct that they completely gave a pass to people like Bill Clinton on, and certainly Hillary Clinton, who destroyed tens of thousands of classified documents. And so you certainly have a unequal treatment of the law for these people, and they're just simply wrong in the law. And for instance, they're also not ever going to be able to prove that President Trump did this willfully to harm the United States. Everything he's always done has been to protect Americans and protect the United States, especially from the permanent bureaucratic class in Washington, D.C.
Before I get to Raynard, why would the president want to keep those documents in the first place?
Well, the answer to that is what he told the American people last night, which is the same reason that every president ends up with presidential documents when they leave office, is that presidents will typically take a number of documents with them when they leave the White House for the final time, because you have a number of things that are personal, a number of things that are presidential, and there's always a period of time that it takes for the National Archives to ingest presidential records into their systems. And most importantly, presidents always have a right to access the documents that were created during their term of office.
What about some of his own lawyers, his legal team, gone on different platforms saying he was a danger, it was reckless? Bill Barr saying he should never run for office again, the former Attorney General, talking about how dangerous the president's behavior was when it came to these classified documents. Are they part of the witch hunt also?
Well, I mean, first of all, Bill Barr was never his lawyer. Bill Barr was the Attorney General of the United States, and unfortunately somebody who is part of that bureaucratic class in Washington, D.C.
What about the president's lawyers who have gone on TV, outraged over his behavior?
I can't speak to what other people said.
But I'm talking about his lawyer. Why would his lawyers?
Which ones?
I'm not going to get into the why, but they have gone on Fox, some of the lawyers that have represented him, and have talked about his behavior. I'm just asking you why. I'm not trying to indict. I'm just asking you, why would they betray a sacred position, a position of trust, his legal team?
I don't know exactly why they would do that. They would have to speak for themselves. What I know is what I have seen, which is a president that has always took his responsibility to the American people seriously, and has always looked out for American interests first and foremost, and somebody who simply doesn't trust the bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. And so does that explain one of the reasons he might want to make sure that documents are gone through very thoroughly in his office before they're turned over to those bureaucrats? I think it absolutely does. And I think that is very, very important for this case, because they have to prove as part of this case that he was willfully violating the law in such a way to harm the United States effectively. And they're not going to be able to do that because it just isn't true.
Your comments, Ray?
Yeah, thank you, Armstrong. I think the issue is more, I think Jesse laid out the legal side perfectly. My issue is on more of the public relations media side of it. And I think that the president is heading in the right direction as far as his public response. But I think it's not enough for him to say there's a two-tier justice system. He has to go a step further and I think talk to the average American who understands they have someone in their family or they themselves have gone through the justice system and had. The problem with our justice system is not the two-tier track of justice. It's the prosecuting attorneys who have this prosecutorial judgment and discretion they can use. That's where the problem is, because you can make an argument that these same prosecutors and the Justice Department should have prosecuted Hillary Clinton. They had the discretion to do so or not to do so. That's where the issue. And so if I'm the president or I'm one of his advisors, I'm advising him to find some credible black folks, especially, who've been through the legal system and say, I am you. I understand what it's like to be falsely accused. I understand what it's like to have prosecutors who are just going overboard to get a conviction, and it's more political than legal. And I think he can change the public relations dynamic on the ground, and he's fallen short of that so far.
So let me come back to you, Jesse. So why would James Trusty and John Roddy, his lawyers, quit immediately after their boss is indicted?
I don't want to speculate on why they left the team, but I think they've been pretty clear by going out that they believe Donald Trump to be innocent, that they believe that this is a witch hunt. I also agree that President Trump, there's a political aspect of this, and I think he is going to go out there and talk to the American people, and he's going to talk more and more about the fact that this unequal system of justice that we have in this country has to be fixed. This is the president who signed into law the biggest criminal justice reform law in decades. Which absolutely infuriated the bureaucratic class at the Department of Justice, by the way. So I think he understands that. I think he's going to talk about it more. He's going to do what he's always done, which is connect with the American people on this. And the American people are wise to it. The American people know that they're always going to find some excuse to not go after people like Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden. They're always going to say, well, no reasonable prosecutor would bring this case. And then, oh, lo and behold, we're going to appoint an unreasonable prosecutor to go after Donald Trump, who will bring a ridiculous case.
Let me go to Sam Faddis. I tell you what bothers me about this conversation. I think what has become so dangerous in America when you idolize people like a Biden or the Clintons or Trump, because you place them on this pedestal, and if you're loyal to their party label, because everybody does it, you can see no fault or no accountability or responsibility that this person or persons have and the accusations that are being leveled against them. And everything that our guests are saying is true. But is this the new standard for America when it comes to our presidents and our elected officials?
Well, Armstrong, look, I think your concern is completely valid, right? It is. I am a supporter of the America First movement, the Patriot movement, the MAGA movement. It bothers me when I hear people use the term great MAGA king in regard to Donald Trump. That's not an attack on him. That's just a statement that I think we decided well over a couple of centuries ago that we don't have kings in the United States of America. So we shouldn't be approaching this problem, regardless of party affiliation. We shouldn't look at this that way. What I will say, from more of an intel perspective.
Hold the part about intel, Sam. Let me just take a break and come back, because I don't want to interrupt what you have to say. We'll be back. And welcome back. Sam, please continue.
Intel perspective, shifting gears here, right? That being my background. What I know about the accusations against Donald Trump is what I've read, right? I don't have any firsthand knowledge of that. They basically boil down to, and I'm not speaking in legalese here, just as a layman. This is a guy who they're accusing of mishandling, improperly storing classified information, these kinds of things. Less than ideal, if true. Now, let's just stop for a second. We've mentioned Hillary a couple of times. Hillary ran classified information that amounts to tens of thousands of documents off a private server in violation of a whole stack of federal statutes. Now, that's not just less than ideal. I will guarantee you, as a former ops officer, that every intel service on the planet that's worth its salt punched a hole into that server and downloaded every one of those documents. In other words, those documents didn't end up in a closet at Mar-a-Lago and were stored improperly. Those documents ended up in the hands of foreign powers all over the country. All over the world, including some of our most dangerous enemies. Let's look at Joe Biden. This guy is up to his eyeballs in mountains of evidence that suggests not only was he moving classified information to places he shouldn't have, but that millions of dollars have come to him from overseas, and a lot of that from guys that are Chinese intelligence officials or directly connected to Chinese intelligence officials. So that's not a case of, hey, he just had this stuff in his garage and we wish he didn't. There's a mountain of evidence that suggests we ought to have a major investigation of the fact that this guy has been working for our number one enemy on the planet and providing them classified information. We don't do anything about Hillary and we don't do anything about Joe, but we're going to indict Donald Trump. Now, that's not just a two-tier justice system. We don't have a justice system anymore, if that's the case. If there's no even pretense of being even-handed and the justice system is now being used for expressly political purposes, then that's a lot bigger than Joe or Donald Trump or anybody else. That ultimately is the end of the republic, right? And that's not hyperbole. when the average American just accepts that being charged is no longer even, there's not even a pretense that it's based on being even-handed or principles. It's purely political. I mean, we are done, right? When you wake up with the average American thinking that, why is anybody paying attention to the?
You know, and this is exactly what our guests are saying. You just can't have it going one way. You only punish Republicans, and Democrats always get a pass. But let me just stay with you, Sam, because Senator Grassley just announced this week 17 recordings between the FBI operative who actually listened to the tapes of Joe Biden and his son Hunter. The former vice president is on 2 of those tapes, actually accepting a $5 million bribe to get rid of the prosecutor in Ukraine, and that the mainstream media refuses to talk about. They bury it, and they focus all their time and energy on former President Donald Trump. If this were a Republican, with the vice president, now president, with these kind of allegations, there would be cries for impeachment, there would be protests, but yet there's no hint of it. Talk about the FBI informant and what they are alleging.
Well, I mean, the short version of this is, and I think this has been evident for some time, it's just we keep seeing additional details added. The FBI has been in possession for years now, at least since they got the laptop, the famous Hunter laptop from hell, of evidence that screams that the Bidens and Joe, that's not, let's just be clear, including and principally Joe Biden, have been taking money from foreign powers, have been corrupt, in regard to Ukraine, for instance, that they were paid millions of dollars to lean on the Ukrainians to get them to back off in investigating Burisma, a corrupt natural gas company. But again, I keep coming back to the real elephant in the room, if you will. In the middle of this is just stacks and stacks of evidence that says the Bidens have been in contact with Chinese intelligence and entities in Chinese intelligence that we know as a fact, nobody disputes. Their express purpose is to buy and control foreign officials, right? CEFC China Energy got their head of their company appointed special advisor to the Czech Republic, basically took over the Czech Republic for a period of time. They bought the president of Uganda, established. Patrick Ho, one of their senior officials, went to prison for bribing and controlling UN officials on our soil. Those guys are at the heart of the contact with Joe Biden. It's not just about corruptions, prostitutes, cocaine, all of that. At the heart of this screaming is the possibility that the Chinese actually have their hooks into the guy sitting in the Oval Office. DOJ and FBI have no time for that, have actively worked beyond that, as you're indicating, as the recent evidence indicates, have actively worked to hide that, to cover for that. But now we're seriously going to devote all of these resources to the fact that Donald Trump had some stuff in a closet that we wish he didn't have.
Raynard?
Yeah, I don't know if your audience is aware, Armstrong. For example, do you realize the FBI is trying to finalize a deal either in Virginia or in Maryland to build their new headquarters? It's 3 times the size of the Pentagon. Why would a domestic law enforcement agency need a building bigger than our Department of Defense, number one? I think conservatives are making a grave mistake by talking about defunding the FBI. The rank and file FBI agents are not the problem. It's the political appointees and the senior level SES senior bureaucrats who are not subjected to transition from president. That's where the problem is political. They need to, the Congress needs to reform the way these political appointees operate, but the notion to defund the FBI, the premier law enforcement agency in the world, not just the U.S., I think is misplaced, and we need reform, but it's got to be at the higher echelon. That's where the problem is.
You know, it is, Jess, if you think about how everyone has laid out the issues surrounding the Clintons and the Bidens, I mean, it is so corrupt. It is such a betrayal. It's so treasonous, but yet it's not a flicker or paragraphs in the mainstream media narrative.
No, of course not. It's something that they constantly want to give them a pass on, and then you have Hillary Clinton going on Twitter and effectively bragging that she was above the law with her emails and never got prosecuted on the day that Trump was indicted. So this hubris that you get from the Clintons and from the people that are protected by that permanent D.C. bureaucracy is really, really troubling, and it's something that it's absolutely true that you have no justice at all when you have unequal justice. And so we truly, truly need to put a stop to that. We need to get back to a country where we live under the rule of law and that people don't go after their political opponents. Quite frankly, we need serious, serious reforms in the Department of Justice and the FBI. I agree that at the FBI, that's mostly at the higher levels, but unfortunately, because of this town, because there are so many bureaucrats in this town that believe that they know better what Americans need than Americans themselves, that government flows from the bureaucratic class to the people rather than the opposite, that we are going to need some very, very serious systemic changes in our federal law enforcement.
Quickly, before we say goodbye to you and Raynard, Sam staying with us, did not Trump on his watch pursue these charges against Hillary Clinton?
No.
Never.
No, he never did. He respected the independence of the Justice Department, and after Comey said no charges, nothing happened.
But the Democrats don't respect it.
Because we have unilateral disarmament.
Listen, Raynard, it's always a pleasure seeing you. We've got to have you back. Jesse, thank you for joining us. Sam, and
thank you, Armstrong.
We'll continue. We're going to talk about China on the other side of this break. I'm Armstrong Williams. Don't go away. We're now joined by Gven Sariol, and who's the CEO of Art Wealth Educational. He's in the studio, and Billy Carson, CEO of Forbidden Knowledge TV and a best-selling author. Thank you both so much for joining us. Why is, you know, I was listening to Sam Faddis earlier talk about China and what a threat China has become. Do you think that the United States, are you concerned about us using, let me start with you, Billy.
Okay.
Are you concerned about the United States losing its status as the world reserve currency?
I'm not really concerned about the United States losing its status as the world reserve currency, simply because when you look and you analyze the way that China uses the yen and its other currency, they have a certain economic system based on production of goods. And if they expose or go beyond that, you're going to see a situation where they could destabilize their own currency. So I tend to think that the United States currency will still stand for some time to come, as we probably make a couple of slight adjustments in the way that we are perceived around the world. Right now, I think that what's going on with Russia and Ukraine may have a small impact, but nothing too big.
What about the counterintelligence and the espionage, economic espionage that just continues to emanate out of the country? So isn't that a huge threat that we just don't pay enough attention to?
Well, I agree with that. There's a lot of espionage. There's a lot of threat that we have with our currency the way it is right now. That's why you see the U.S. trying to tap into other markets and trying to tap into even crypto. They're trying to destabilize other platforms that are using crypto, and they're trying to get into that field so they can get a rein or a grasp on that industry, so they may be able to control it a little bit more and then reap the rewards of finances and taxes from that area as well.
So let me go to Sariol here. Why do you think China quietly is supporting Russia in its fight against Ukraine? Is it to undermine the United States, or do they feel they're actually in the theater fighting with the United States? Because most of the people in the know that Ukraine's war is a proxy war by the United States.
Yeah, I mean, when you take a look at the backing that the Chinese are giving towards the Russians, I mean, in terms of their sovereign currency, I don't think that has much of it. I think that they're backing their closest neighbor, which is obviously Russia. But I don't think that, by them contributing to that, they're looking to really build their BRICS nation, which the BRICS is, Brazil, Russia, China, South Africa, India. These are definitely currency or countries that want to maintain their sovereignty. And as we saw, with what the United States did with wiping out $800 and some billion of Russia's money, with a stroke of a key, I think they're just trying to keep their interests aligned, and that's why this BRICS nation is so big right now and growing. I think there's like 30-some nations on the waiting list to get into it because people are kind of getting sick of the United States dollar and what they can do with it. It's kind of like rules for thee, but not for me. We can go in, we can invade Iraq, we can destabilize the entire Middle East, but you can't go and invade Ukraine, and that's unfortunately what's going on. So I think they're trying to really align themselves so that they can make their own rules and not have to be subservient to the United States.
Well, let me follow up with this. It is a known fact that China's economy has its own problems, and it's also forecast that even China at its best, with all things equal, could not possibly overtake the U.S. economy until 2035.
Yeah, 100%. And, when you take a look at the actual numbers, China will say that they're at a 6 to 8% growth. That's closer to probably a 0 to 2% growth. And here's a statistic that kind of really threw me for a loop. In China, there's like 63 million ghost apartments in these ghost towns that they've created that have nobody living in this place. And when you think about that, in the United States, we have about 21 million apartments, of which are actually, occupied. And so the Chinese government is definitely not as strong as they say it is. And it is heavily reliant on the United States buying their goods and services. And this is, going back to what you asked, Billy, this is one of the main reasons that I don't think that China anywhere near soon is going to get the world reserve currency. And not just that, but they've also, they started what's called a CBDC, or a central bank digital currency, but people just don't trust it with, China's social credit system and all the things that they have going in terms of suppression of content. The rest of the world is going to go, wait a second, this is a cryptocurrency that's programmable money. I have a direct contact with a central bank by holding this cryptocurrency, and if I say something you don't like, you can take that money out with a snap of a finger. I'm not cool with that, and I think the United States is able to do this, and this is why I don't think that people are going to sit there, governments are going to go, yeah, let's go ahead and put all of our money or start dividing all of our assets and all of our goods in the Chinese yen. It's just not going to happen.
Sam Faddis, is fascinating how the narrative is the mighty Chinese military. And yet, if you talk to the people in UAE and the Middle East, if you talk to them all throughout Africa, yes, China has been their partners, but what have they had to show for that in the long run? Collapse of the infrastructure that they built. Word is meaningless. They like to leave their people on the ground to grow them, to control and take over the economy. I mean, just look at that. While I even look at it even in the Caribbean, in terms of what China does to move these nations forward, it cannot even compare to the United States. And as is often not mentioned, any of these nations would much prefer to have the United States as its ally than the Chinese. The Chinese are weak all across the world. But why is it that we continue this narrative that the biggest threat to the world are the Chinese?
Well, Armstrong, look, I agree with you in your characterization of the way the Chinese deal with countries all over the world, right? We talk about colonialism in Africa and the legacy of colonialism in Africa. Well, the Chinese are putting that to shame. Their whole plan in Africa is loot the place. And I also agree with the fact that, look, let's just stop with the fact that the Chinese are invincible. They're 20 feet tall. They're inevitably going to take over the planet. Let's be real. They have a lot of weaknesses. They have a lot of issues. A lot of the statistics that come out of China are nonsensical in terms of growth and so forth. But I also think that one of the things we need to consider here is we're talking about the Chinese, and we're not talking about a billion Chinese. We're talking about the Chinese Communist Party and its leadership. We're talking about Xi Jinping and the people around him. Their worldview is not one based on what is the most productive economic model or how to make the most money or these kinds of things. These are guys who come from a worldview. I mean, Xi idealizes Mao Zedong and envisions himself as the successor in many, many ways, not just in a position. Mao was willing to kill 100 million Chinese by forcing them into the villages, which made no sense from any perspective other than one, which is cement his control over that and make himself the dictator and crush all opposition. This is the way Xi Jinping looks at this. So when we talk about, confrontation between China and the United States, what it'll do to the Chinese economy, I mean, from a capitalist worldview, it makes no sense on earth, right? You make all your money selling to the West, you're going to start a war with the West? That's the ultimate cutting off your nose to spite your face thing, right? But as I say often, when we start attributing to our enemies the same worldview that we have, we usually end up in a really bad place. So it does, for me, all of this talk about weaknesses and reality checks and all of that, I'm on board 100%. It doesn't change the fact that the Chinese Communist Party's intention is to become the dominant world power. And we have to face that. Doesn't mean we have to freak out, run around in circles, set our hair on fire. It's just we need to sit down and say, okay, given that reality, what should our policies be? And one of those policies I would submit to you is, why don't we stop feeding the dragon, right? Why don't we begin to turn in the direction of disentangling ourselves, at least to some extent, economically from those guys?
And Billy, and manufacturing on American soil is very important. I mean, people forget when former President Bill Clinton championed NAFTA. NAFTA, in the long run, was a complete disaster for the United States.
Yeah, NAFTA was a disaster. We have to look and find a way to develop our own products and goods. Right now, a lot of the world is relying on China, and now, of course, India. And we've kind of relinquished our power, and what really made America America, what made America great, was the fact that we were producing and creating our own goods, and we were exporting those out to other countries, and then utilizing them here in our own country. But now, the way the situation is, we have a lot of reliance on other countries, not only for pharmaceuticals and other types of goods, but those things that are that make us really who we are being outsourced. We need to bring them back home and develop them here. And I think that if we, one of the problems with China and why they won't actually make their money global is because what will happen is it'll increase the pay rate for their own employees there. They have to pay more money because the value of their dollar will change and evolve. And so they don't want to do that. They want to keep prices low and cheap so they can continue to outsource. But here in America, we need to be able to bring those things here. And I think that we need to become more competitive. We need to find a way to increase wages, and we need to find a way to bring people on to work here and develop products and goods here, including the pharmaceuticals and things that we need for our own people right here in America.
When we come back with our guests, one of the things we don't talk about enough is how China is the best at prostituting our political leaders, our public officials, and our institutions. They can be bought, they can be sold, they can be rented, and they can be bought again. And that is the one thing that China has done a very good job at, the indoctrination of our institutions, of their programs in academia, everywhere, because they spend money. And it seems as though that our elected officials have a price, and there's no price that the Chinese are not willing to pay to infiltrate and get themselves intrinsically involved in not only in our economy, but in the institutions that have the greatest impact on the future of America. We're going to discuss this and much more with our guests when we return. Don't go away. If you believe every child is deserving of a quality education, please go to educationjusticefoundation.com. The Chinese influence our leaders. They have policies more favorable to China than the United States. Let's not forget their predatory lending going on. And let's not also forget their just brazen theft of our intellectual properties. Gven?
So, markets versus our markets. China has a closed capital market, meaning that China doesn't allow foreign investors to come and invest in the majority of their real estate, their stock markets, all that stuff. There's a very, very select few things that people can that are open to the rest of the world. Same as Japan. They both have a closed capital society. Where the United States, we have an open capital society. So that means China can come in, they can buy all the land they want to, they can buy all the stocks they want to, they can buy all the companies they want to, all the technology that they want to. And this is a big way that they do control. Obviously, we know by, how we see the influence on, these big technocrats or these big companies in Washington, where they're able to just come in and dictate policy and get it pushed through. But by China owning all of these resources, all of these companies, they've infiltrated the United States, and they've been able to create, no pun intended, a Chinese wall of us being able to do the exact same thing. And so it's definitely concerning that we're able to do it like that, but it's by design, and they keep it that way so that, we keep spending money on their goods. They use that money to bring it over here, invest in bonds, real estate, stock market, so that they can keep their money going and keep our economy almost inflated. But they're not interested in, taking our money that we pay them and cashing that out and spreading it to their people, because if not, what ends up happening is they end up in the same predicament that we were in back in the 1950s when we used to be the world's workshop. Here, we used to manufacture a lot of things, export a lot of things, but eventually, like you were talking about earlier, Armstrong, with NAFTA, we shipped all those jobs away, and now it's going to be damn near impossible to bring those jobs back to the United States, because we're also used to paying, $1,000 for an iPhone or $2,000 for an iPad. If we were to bring all that manufacturing back with where wages are at, we'd be paying 3 or 4 times, maybe even more. So I think that we've really got to get creative, and I think this is going to all change with AI, because AI is going to be able to do all these jobs and more for way, way less. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens, in my opinion.
Sam, it is often said that the United States is the lone superpower, but every now and then, often you hear China discussed as being a superpower. What does it mean today to be a superpower, and do you qualify China as that? And if so, what makes her a superpower?
Yeah, I don't qualify China as a superpower, and I do think we are the lone superpower. What qualifies it? Look, an exact definition I can't give you. It is a combination of political, economic, and military power, and we should not dismiss the fact that we sit in a position with vast alliances, economic power, diplomatic power. I mean, if you were sitting on, you would not want to trade places and and play this game, not trying to be silly about it, from the standpoint of sitting in Beijing and looking at the breadth of what the United States of America can do. I will add this to what your previous guest just said. In addition to the straight up economic impact of that we are feeling from the Chinese, we have to understand that they have an express government-wide program focused on elite capture, their term. That is the deliberate buying of the elite in target countries. We're obviously target number one. Whatever they define, whoever they believe constitutes somebody who has influence and power, they buy them straight up. CEFC, China Energy, that's been in bed with the Bidens for years. Huge company, lots of money. CEFC, China Energy, doesn't produce a product. There is no economic sense to what CEFC, China Energy does. They're not out to make money. They bring money and they buy you one way or the other via a supposed economic relationship or a straight up bribe. And that is the model for the Chinese. It is enormously successful. And you're absolutely right that they have gained control over God knows how many thousands of Americans in this model.
Billy, what else is it about this elephant in the room that we don't discuss enough?
Well, you know, what we don't discuss is the fact that China has been going around lending other countries money at a rate that the countries can never pay back. And so we're looking at a situation where they're kind of almost geopolitically enslaving countries and then making those dictators and the puppets, so to speak, for them. And then, of course, installing, when they can't pay them back, they install a military base right there in their country. So they are gaining some military prowess around the world by being able to do that. And at some point, we need to really address that issue.
You know, one of the things, even in all this, there is also a relationship between the two governments where they absolutely have to work together, Gven. Obviously, the media doesn't want to show this, and it's obvious it's not in either's best interest to be in this kind of conflict, whether it's over Taiwan, whether it's over what's going on in Ukraine, because they really, in many ways, are interdependent on each other, Gven.
Yeah, no, and you know, we were just talking about this on the break that I personally live in Panama City, Panama, and before that I lived in the country of Costa Rica, and before that I lived in the country of Georgia. And here's the thing. Don't rule China's influence out, even outside of this. And in my opinion, it's actually beating the United States for the same reasons that Billy was just saying, that they are going and they are investing in infrastructure throughout the entire world right now. It's wild. I mean, you should have seen the machines. You've never seen these sorts of machines in the United States, that they were drilling through mountains to create these massive highways from one end of each of these countries to the other. And so, you know, right now, that's something that I'm really looking at seriously, because even over here, you know, we talk about, you know, the United States being so close to Russia. That's been, you know, their big thing, that, you know, right on the other side of Ukraine, we were, you know, lining up military and NATO and all this stuff. But China is also right in our backyard, you know, building infrastructure and indebting all of these countries. And I've seen it firsthand, and it's wild. I mean, I'm sitting here kind of going like, where's the U.S. in all of this? Why isn't the U.S. the one that's bringing this, you know, to our neighbors, to places where we can, you know, take advantage of, you know, cheaper labor and not have to go so far away for that, and a ton of resources. Why that's occurring is beyond me, but it is occurring. Rest assured that China is a major influence when it comes to that.
You know, what's fascinating, Charles, is that oftentimes when I do lecture and I'm talking about China and I ask the audience the question, who are the biggest agricultural producers, the biggest cattle farms, chicken farms, swine farms, people have no idea how huge China is when it comes to agriculture.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's true probably of every element of the Chinese economy, right? And again, I'll throw this into the pot, sort of, you know, let's be clear. We're not talking about the Chinese people here. Nobody's afraid of, this is not an ethnic thing. Nobody thinks that 1.4 billion Chinese wake up every morning and say, we got to go attack the Americans. They're the ones that suffer under the Chinese communists more than anybody else. They're the ones who wake up in the world's biggest prison camp. We're talking about at the top of this, in control of all these resources, is the Chinese Communist Party, right? We're talking about a totalitarian, thuggish entity that will kill its own people by the millions to achieve political objectives. That's the harsh reality. That's what you're talking about. So we need to get really serious about this threat and understand what we're looking at.
So, Gven, how do you respond to his pushback on your concern?
I mean, I think that's a great response. I will say this, and I've been fascinated with the Chinese government, just like I have been even with the U.S. government, and digging deep into that. And I would just say this: I'm not ruling them out, just like I'm not ruling out the United States. I mean, they're both massive superpowers, obviously ideologically very, very different. But when it comes to China, here's the one thing that I can say that they have. Good, bad, or indifferent about the Communist Party, they've banded together. And I think we see that in a lot of different Asian cultures. We see it in Japan and certainly China, where these different countries, they have more of a kind of a hive mentality where, like, we're going this way and it's for the good of the community, not for the good of the left or the right or the middle or the anybody. It's just for the good of the community. And so when I see that, we definitely have to look at that. I think that there's good things that China brings to the table that we could learn from, and I think that there's great things from the United States that they can learn from as well. How do we blend that? How do we start to get along? How do we say, hey, we're not your enemy, let's make this world a better place? That's where I'm really, really looking forward in seeing how we can do that, because they are our neighbors in the world, in my opinion.
Let me go to you, Billy. In having a discussion about China, when you think about the Wuhan lab, the COVID-19, the virus, and they're still suffering from COVID there, I think one of the most dangerous areas that we could be concerned about, the Chinese, it's in the area of research, because they're reckless. They don't have the same standards that we. And listen, if one thing goes wrong, the world can die. Many people can die as a result. Just look at what happened in the Wuhan lab.
Yeah, the Wuhan lab was a real eye-opener. You're looking at a situation where we know now for a fact that that is where COVID originated. I remember seeing an FBI press release here in the United States where there was a professor at Harvard that was actually arrested. He had 2 Chinese espionage agents posing as students there at Harvard. They ended up capturing them. They were doing experimentation on a nanoparticle type of a virus, like a man-made virus that had nanoparticles in it. They were transferring that back to where? To Wuhan. Now, so we find out now that this is going back and forth. Now, all of a sudden in Wuhan, there's a release of this containment of this deadly virus. They tried to blame it on animals and everything else, but the fact is, it was released there. They have no oversight on a lot of their experiments. They have no oversight on their science. They just really are running like the Wild Wild West out there. And because of that, it's a huge danger and a threat to the world, just basically because they are doing Frankenstein's type experiments every single day. We already know they don't look at any copyright laws, or they just really don't care. So they're putting out a lot of things into the world with no oversight, and that is really dangerous. We need to find a way to come up with some type of a global law or rule of law that allows everyone to operate under specific guidelines and parameters so we can prevent things like this from happening again.
Sam, you've got a minute and you got the last word.
Well, I think if we're looking for dangers to end on for the program, I think this has got to be the point of the spear, man. My last job at CIA was running the Terrorist Weapons of Mass Destruction Unit. What happened at Wuhan, which in my opinion was a virus jump in the fence that had been genetically engineered, was relatively mild, right? COVID, in the scheme of things, kills relatively few people. You could easily have the exact same event, and it would kill with a virus that would kill 1 out of every 3 people it infected. Now, you saw how fast that thing went worldwide, and then imagine 1/3 of the world's population dead. That's not science fiction. That's not a bad movie. That's real. Could happen.
And we need to rein them in and stop being afraid of them and tell the truth, because you're right. It's one thing to kill a few, but 1 out of 3, that is massive. That is world genocide. Thank you both. Thank all of you and our earlier guests for joining us for this edition of the Armstrong Williams Show. I'm Armstrong Williams. Enjoy what remains of your weekend.